Today's video is sponsored by Third Wave Water. So who needs a $325 espresso tamper, really? Because since I got this, my shots, if you were to put a blindfold on me, have not changed at all. They were good before, they're good now. This tamper has done some things for me, but making a dramatic improvement in the quality of my espresso is not one of them. And yet, there is something kind of magical about this. I picked it up at the World of Coffee Expo back in April in San Diego, which if you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know was a long time coming. I mentioned this tamper at the end of my tamper roundup video as basically this white whale that I had kind of pined for many years and couldn't actually get. And so when this new version dropped for the World of Coffee Expo, on opening day, opening 10 minutes of the show, I made a beeline for the Artpresso design booth to make sure that I wouldn't miss out again. It's called the Dialed Tamper, and it's a collaboration between Stephen Monty of Artpresso Design and Chris Baca. And in some ways, I think it's one of the only tampers in this category that's being sort of totally honest with you about what it actually is. Now, before we go into specifics about the Dialed Tamper, we need to talk about tampers and tamper market in general, because it has a bit of an issue. There's this question out there when it comes to espresso tamping that's been, forgive me, tamped into oblivion. And that is, how hard do you need to tamp? Does that actually matter? And the answer, pretty consistently studied by many different people, is not really. A puck of espresso ground coffee will come up to its peak density pretty quickly, and any pressure that you apply beyond that point is not really doing anything, you're just pressing harder. Now, one thing that does matter is evenness of that puck, and a lot of that has to do with actually what you do before you press the tamp down. But once you are tamping, you want to make sure you know your level, so there's not like a lot thicker on one side than the other. You don't want any soft or less dense spots in the puck, anything like that. The amount of force and how it's applied past a certain point just doesn't really matter as much. Now, with that in mind, you look at the premium tamper market out there, and a lot of them are kind of built on a very similar pitch. You know, without naming names, a lot of them really try and justify that higher end price point based purely on performance. You know, auto leveling is a pretty common thing, but then beyond that, you have all these different complicated mechanisms to apply force in a certain way. Some of them even will use fluid inside to achieve a more even graduation of pressure. All of them are selling you a version of the same thing. Tamp better, extract better, the price is justified by what it does to your shot. And here's the thing, some of those tampers do actually improve your shot in marginal ways, as does this one, and we'll talk about that. But that math also does have a ceiling. You know, at a certain point, tamping is just tamping. And you can achieve some gains by moving up to a slightly more expensive tamper than the one that came with your machine. But you know, $150, $200, $250, you're paying for improvements that, while they may be real, they get increasingly marginal when it actually comes to the quality of what you end up with in the cup. And nobody really seems to want to say that out loud. Now, one thing that actually does move the needle on the quality in your cup in a measurable and consistent way is actually the water that you're using. Third Wave Water is sponsoring today's video, and I've been recommending them on the channel for years because coffee is 98% water. And no matter how many cool things, gadgets, espresso machines, grinders, you line up to get the best cup of coffee possible, it can be sabotaged by the wrong mineral composition in your water itself. Third Wave Water gives you these little packets of minerals that you add to distilled water, which results in a brew that is perfectly formulated, you know, pH, hardness, alkalinity, to make great tasting cups of coffee. And when it comes to espresso, there's also an espresso formulation that's designed to protect the insides of your machine from scale buildup as well. They also have formulas for light, medium, and dark roast. And the team at Third Wave Water is giving you 10% off a one-time purchase using my code DaddyGotCoffee. Link is below. Now, back to the Dialed Tamper, and where this $325 espresso tamper does things a little bit differently. If you go on their website, on their product page, you'll see that they don't actually lead with the things that are designed to help this tamper perform more strongly. They say things like designed to speak to you on an emotional level. Whispers to you from your counter, begging you to pick it up and make an espresso. Built for the ritual. And when you set it down and walk away, you're going to find yourself turning around to look at it again. Chris Baca has a line that he uses when he talks about this thing, and I think it's very enlightening. He says that the tools we use create an emotional connection that is greater than the sum of a certain thing's function. Now, if you don't know Chris Baca, he's kind of a legend in specialty coffee. He's one of the co-founders of Cat and Cloud Coffee. He's a barista and Brewers Cup competitor. And honestly, he's one of the OG coffee YouTubers as well. He's got 2 decades in this industry. And Stephen Monty, who owns Artpresso Design, actually had a very successful career in the shoe industry and made a bit of a left turn out of his passion for coffee, started Artpresso Design, and started working on products like this. These are 2 people who are extremely passionate about the things that they're doing. And it's from within that context that this tamper comes from. And, after watching this project from afar for some time and picking one up myself and using it, you can really see that passion coming through in this. It really is about more than just something that does a specific thing really well. When he's saying that, he's saying this thing is beautiful and over the top, and we built it exactly the way that we wanted to without any compromise because we thought it should exist. Basically, every other tamper is trying to market performance. Even though the Dialed Tamper has some pretty unique components that do that in certain ways, that's not what they're leading with. They never say better extraction, higher TDS, better flavor, none of that stuff. Now, there are some functional claims, and we'll go through them quickly here and just how they do impact the experience of puck preparation. The diameter here is slightly oversized at 58.3 millimeter. That's what Chris calls the Goldilocks zone, as I was asking him some questions about this. And have to kind of agree with him on that. This thing just goes in and out of the basket just like butter. Some oversized tampers can bind. You have to make sure you put them in really straight or they'll kind of get stuck in there. Nothing like that with this. But that being said, when you tamp, it is right up against the edge of your basket and it comes out without any suction at all. Suction can be bad. It can kind of pull the puck out and disturb things after you've tamped. Definitely not something you want. And the specific radius of this thing is designed to avoid that. It also has a compound radius, so it's flatter on the bottom and slightly rounded as you go back onto the edge. That gives you the advantages of, a more convex shaped tamper with a little bit more coffee contact around the edge of the basket without a lot of variance in the center, which can result in channeling. So they're trying to really get the best of both worlds with the design of the bottom of this thing. It's also very well balanced from a weight standpoint. That's almost more a comfort thing than anything, but it is really nice to use. It tamps great. Never had a suction issue, never had a binding issue, just good, consistent performance as long as you're tamping straight. And then there's the stuff that is just kind of extreme and over the top. And I mean that as a compliment to these guys. The piston and cap of this thing are made of 440C stainless. It's very high grade stainless, and it's actually been hardened to 60 HRC. That is extremely hard steel, which is going to make it very resistant to scratching and denting. I saw this video that Chris actually posted to his Instagram stories where he had this old prototype and he was trying to get the base off like this, and it was stuck. So he put it in a vise and he just starts reefing on it to try and get it apart. I'm talking like metal on metal here. And then in the next pane, he's got this piece and he's showing the up close of it. And at first you can't even really see anything wrong with it at all. And then he just goes right up to it and you can see just a couple little tiny marks from just being cranked in this vise. So the steel is very hard. Is that overkill for an espresso tamper?
Yes.
Are Chris and Steven okay with that just being over the top for the sake of it?
Yes.
Also, this crazy color on here, this is not a print or a paint. This is actually a multi-stage anodization process. You know, they have this crazy process. It took me a while to figure out how they did it actually, where they anodize these different colors onto the tamper. And it's all done by hand. So by the time they're finished, you know, each one really is kind of a one of one piece. Now, do they have to do that? No. You know, when I showed a couple friends of mine who are in manufacturing, they were like, wow, that is really intense. You know, I would have thought that that was hydro dipped or something a little bit easier than that maybe. But again, it's that passion to create something that is basically exactly what they wanted without any compromise or consideration of what might get in the way. You know, when you look at all the things that go into it, you just kind of have to say, this is really over the top engineering for something that you're just going to hold in your hand and use to press down on some coffee grounds. And at a certain point, I kind of think that's okay. Now, the dialed tamper isn't the only tamper that exists kind of in this lane that is somewhat outside of performance and is really built more around passion. And I do want to mention those because they may resonate with you depending on your interests and passions. One of them is the Chris King headset tamper. I ride bikes, I love bikes, and this is just a really cool piece of equipment. Again, it's not really trying to sell you anything. From a performance standpoint, it's just saying, hey, you like that really expensive headset that you bought for your bike. Now you can pick up the same thing every time you go to make a shot of coffee. Very cool. Also, the Skateboard Creations tamper. This is made of old laminated skateboards. Also very expensive tamper, made by hand. Very cool product. All of these tampers exist not because someone was trying to market you into convincing you that you needed to buy a certain thing in order to get a better cup of coffee. They were made by people who were passionate about the things that they were making and wanted you to enjoy them as well. Now, in the course of putting together this video, I did pick Chris's brain a little and asked him about, you know, plans for the future of the Dialed. You know, I was hoping that more people would be able to enjoy these and wouldn't end up kind of waiting in the wings like I did for a couple of years. And they're planning on making more of these and maybe expanding a little and doing a few other things that are in a very similar lane. So keep an eye on them. So we have to ask, end game for who? A tamper is a tamper. It's going to compress your coffee. Might this one have some slight improvements over other tampers? Sure. Are those improvements alone worth $325? I think the answer honestly is no. However, this is also my favorite tamper that I've ever used. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. You know, if your next move is a better coffee grinder or upping your water, or even just buying better coffee, any of those things are going to have a bigger impact on your cup than this tamper. But if your setup is pretty dialed and you feel like you have a connection with these tools that you use and pick up and experience several times a day, every day, and you want both high performance and more of a connection to your tools, I think that there actually is a space for things like this. But you know, $325, that's real money. You know, Baca and Steven describe this tamper as being too expensive, too niche, too over the top for anybody realistically to design and produce. And then they went ahead and did it anyway. So I want to hear from you. Where does value for your money and the intersection of performance and experience and emotional connection hit for you? Does spending a little bit more on tools that enrich the experience of making coffee make sense to you? Or do you look at things through a more utilitarian view? And if you're an owner of a dialed tamper, I want to hear from you. Do you enjoy using this thing as much as I do? Would you do it again? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.